Hello, my TOK presentation is called The Power of a Name. And so my real life situation is nominative determinism. And nominative determinism is essentially a theory that states that people tend to gravitate towards careers and general life choices that fit with their names. And this term was first used in the New Scientist magazine in 1994 after its feedback column addressed the fact that a number of studies were carried out by researchers with noticeably fitting names. Apart from this instance, there are also many general cases of people's names that end up reflecting their professions or just their general selves. Now, there is a theoretical framework which was proposed by Lawrence Kastler in 1975, and this theoretical framework essentially is three possible explanations for nominative determinism. So the first one is one's self-image and their self-expectations, which are affected internally by one's name. The second one is the name acting as a social stimulus, and that creates expectations in others. And then the last explanation is genetics, which of course claims that the genes inside of us are what affect the careers passed down along like generations and such. So the knowledge question that I derived from this real life situation is how much evidence is required to establish a theory as true. So I will be discussing this in terms of the two areas of knowledge, the human sciences and history. So starting off with the human sciences, so my claim is that in the human sciences, there is a need for empirical evidence in order to establish a theory as true. So in the case of theories, the empirical knowledge that we are addressing is specifically studies that are done on nominative determinism. So one of these studies is a research paper by Limbs in 2015, and this research paper was a study into the effects of surnames on medical specialization. And through this study, they found that the entries in the medical register for the General Medical Council had a greater frequency of names relevant to medicine and subspecialties than by chance. So essentially, a lot of the people who went to medical fields, a significant amount of them had a connection with their name to the medical field as well. And then the second study is Voracek, Ryder, Steiger, and Swami 2015. And this study was basically a possible genetic explanation for nominative determinism, which goes back to one of the three frameworks. And so what they found was today's Smiths, who have the last name as Smith, tend to have physical capabilities that are similar to their ancestors, who were actual Smiths or blacksmiths, and they were reported to possess above average aptitude for strength-related activities. Now, from this, you can gather that there could possibly be a real correlation between their ancestry and blacksmithing and the name, and how it connects to nominative determinism, because the name has some kind of connection to their abilities. Now, for the empirical evidence that was just given, when you look at it, you realize that basically studies that end up with similar conclusions, which is that there is a significant amount of people whose names affect their career choices and just general selves and capabilities, then it essentially increases the reliability of the theory, which is needed for it to be established as true. So when there is more empirical knowledge, aka in this case studies, to back up the claim, then it is more likely that it's true. In this case, as there are more studies supporting nominative determinism, it is possible for it to be established as something that is true. Now, moving on to history, my claim is, in history, there needs to be recurring examples that showcase the theory in order for it to be established as legitimate. So in this case, in order for a theory to be proven as true, there needs to be multiple examples throughout history, since this is under the history AOK. So starting off, there are some present live examples that showcase nominative determinism in the world right now in influential figures that we know ourselves. One of those is Donald Trump. The word Trump means to win, and it gives off a positive connotation which could affect emotions, and like that kind of certain positive connotating language could have had an effect on him. Of course, we can say that he has trumped in terms of his financial and political success, which could be a connection to his name. There is also Usain Bolt, whose name directly correlates with his profession, and his name being so very connected can also serve as a motivation and consciously, psychologically affect him. Another thing you can take into account for history is labels, considering them historically, because during the early 1000 in England, surnames were used to identify a person's occupation. So if somebody was named Smith, it would be a blacksmith. If they were Taylor, they would be tailors. If they were Mason, stonemasons. And if a fisher, then a fisherman. So from this, you could gather that historical knowledge of one's past and the ancestry can be an important part of a person's identity, because these names could clearly have a direct influence on the new generations that come from those same lines of people who, as I mentioned back in a previous study that I mentioned earlier, can affect what kind of capabilities they possess, possibly through genetics. And now there is always another way to look at nominative determinism and proving whether a theory can be established as true. And so to counter this, there is always the possibility that these connections between the name and a person's career or just destiny in general are simply coincidental. And this was supported by Carl Jung's theory of synchronicity in 1952, and he essentially referred to Stekel's work in his theory of synchronicity, and his theory was that events without causal relationships that seem to be meaningfully related, and so there is always the chance that nominative determinism is simply just something that happens to be coincidental, because after all, it is not seen in every single person we meet's names. There's possibly a way to connect everyone if you really look into it and force it, but it is not always common to see it. There are many instances throughout history, but it's not necessarily confirmed. So in general, theories cannot necessarily be true unless they have a cause and effect relationship established specifically. However, theories are at least meant to be up in the air, as there is always a chance of correlation between certain events that can possibly be proven, and this is why there's a specific distinction between theories and hypotheses, but both have the general same meaning of having kind of like a claim that could possibly be true, and that is shown clearly in nominative determinism because there is a significant amount of evidence to back it up, but we are not necessarily exactly sure whether it is significant enough that this theory can be established as true, but certain amounts of evidence can be used in order to prove it, and it can be seen as established as true by some, depending on the amount of evidence it has.